Oh my God.
Oh no, what happened to you? Easy now, it's okay. Easy there, it's all right. Shh, I've got you. Stay with me.
The wind was very cold that December morning. Robert Hayes sat inside his old blue truck, watching the snow start to fall. He was a farmer, and he had seen many winters, but something felt different about this one. The sky was not just grey, it was almost black, like someone had covered the whole world with a dark blanket. Robert was 63 years old. He had worked with horses and animals his entire life. He owned a large farm that stretched across 200 acres, and people in the county knew him as a hard man, a practical man, a man who did not let his feelings get in the way of his work. That was what Robert believed about himself. That was what everyone believed about him. But this morning, something was going to change everything. Robert drove to the county livestock auction because he needed a horse. One of his work horses had gone lame the month before, and winter was here. He needed an animal that was young and strong enough to pull his hay wagon through the cold months ahead. The road to the auction barn was already becoming dangerous. Snow was falling faster now, and Robert could see other trucks and trailers moving quickly, like everyone was racing to finish their business before the storm got worse. The parking lot at the auction barn was full of people. Farmers from all around the county were there to buy or sell their animals. The storm was coming, and nobody wanted to be stuck on the roads with animals in their trailers. Everyone was moving fast, talking loud, worried about the time. Robert parked his truck near the main door. He pulled his jacket tight around his body because the cold was cutting through everything. Even his thick jacket could not keep out the wind. He walked into the barn, and the warm air hit his face. The barn was crowded with farmers and workers. Horses were standing in pens, cattle were making noise. The smell of animals and hay and dust filled the air. Robert had been to this auction many times before. He knew what to expect. The bigger, stronger animals would sell for good money. The young animals with good breeding papers would sell fast. And the animals that were sick or broken or unwanted would go cheap if anyone bought them at all. Robert walked past many pens. He saw strong cattle with good muscle. He saw young horses that looked healthy and strong. He looked at some of them, but none of them really interested him. He just needed something practical, something that could work hard and not cost him too much money. He was not looking for anything special. He was just looking for a tool to do his job, like buying a new tractor or a new piece of equipment. But then something stopped him. He came to pen number 31, and he saw something that made him pause. There was a foal standing alone in the pen. She was very small. She could not have been more than 3 months old. She was so small that she looked like she might fall over at any moment. Her body was very thin. Robert could see all of her ribs very clearly. He could see the sharp points of her hip bones. Her coat was not clean and shiny like a healthy foal. It was matted and dirty and the color of old copper mixed with mud. But it was her eyes that made Robert stop completely. The foal had eyes that were very large and very dark. And in those eyes, Robert saw something that he did not expect to see in an animal auction barn. He saw awareness. He saw suffering. He saw the kind of knowledge that comes from pain. This small foal had experienced something bad. Robert could see it in the way she stood. She was leaning against the wooden post of her pen, like she could not stand on her own. Her front legs were shaking, not just a small shake, a steady trembling that would not stop. Someone had thrown an old blanket over her back, but it was so thin and worn that Robert could see right through it in many places. The blanket did not help her much at all. Robert read the label on the pen. It said, "Reject foal, no papers, mother deceased as is starting bid $50. Robert looked around to see if anyone else was looking at this foal. Nobody was. All the other farmers were standing in front of the pens with the bigger horses. They were looking at the animals that had value. They were looking at animals with papers and history and breeding. Nobody was looking at this small, sick, unwanted foal. Robert found himself walking closer to her pen. He had not decided to do this. His feet just moved him closer. When he got to the fence, the foal's ears turned toward him. Her big dark eyes looked at him. But she did not move. She could not move. Robert could see that something was wrong with her back legs. The way she stood on them was not right. She was putting most of her weight on her front legs. This small foal was in pain. Robert had worked with horses his whole life, and he knew pain when he saw it. Robert took off his glove and reached out his hand. He let her sniff his fingers. The foal did this slowly. She was not afraid, but she was careful. And then she rested her soft nose on his hand. It was a simple thing, a small gesture. But it meant something important. It meant that this small, broken, suffering animal still believed that a human could be kind. Robert pulled his hand back. He was angry at himself for feeling something. Feeling was not practical. Feeling was not useful. He needed to think about business, about money, about work. He did not need to think about the big dark eyes of a sick foal. He walked away from pen 31. He told himself he would not look at her again. But as he walked around the auction barn, looking at other animals, he kept coming back to that pen. Each time he walked past her, she was in the same place, trembling, watching him with those eyes that seemed to know too much about suffering. The auction started, and Robert was not ready for what was about to happen. The auctioneer called out lot after lot. Animals sold fast. The farmers were moving quickly. The storm outside was getting worse. The sky was getting darker. The wind was making sounds against the barn like it was angry. And then the auctioneer called lot number 31. Robert stood up straighter. He had not planned to bid on this foal. He had not decided anything. But he watched as the auctioneer began talking about the small, unwanted animal. The auctioneer called her broken. He called her unsuitable. He said her mother was dead and that she had no papers and no value. He was basically saying that nobody should bother with her. But then a man in the back raised his hand to bid. And without really thinking about what he was doing, Robert raised his hand too. The two men started bidding against each other. The price went up. $50, $75, $100. Robert did not even know why he was doing this. Every sensible thought in his mind was telling him to stop. He had work to do at home. He had hay to move. He had a snowstorm coming that would require all of his attention. He did not need a sick foal. He did not need this problem, but he kept raising his hand. When the final bid was $130, the other man finally put his hand down and shook his head. He thought Robert was crazy. Maybe Robert was crazy. He had just bought an animal that most people would have put down already. He had bought an unwanted foal during the worst snowstorm the county had seen in 40 years. And he had no idea why he had done it, except that he had looked into those enormous dark eyes, and he could not leave her
She had been running
behind.
my husband paid for his own horse to be abused. She had seen many money to finance the suffering of an animal, both good and bad. He hid it from me, walked up to her with the papers for the and now I own that horse's son with a strange expression. And I own the truth about everything. It was not quite a smile. And it was more like the look someone gives you when they feel sorry for you. She hung up the phone. That one is in very bad shape. She stood next to Chance, and she was handing him the papers. Let herself cry. Her voice was grief that she had been holding came. The mother died during grief for Dynasty. This foal has been through something very rough. Grief for the man she doing her a favor if you just put her down. Grief for herself. I mean, stupid. She is not going to be good for anything. Chance stood next to her while she cried. He did not move away. He took the papers from Carol's hands. He did not judge and walked back. He just stood there, number 31, breathing. The foal was still standing in exactly just like Martha was trying to do. She had not moved at all. I am sorry. She was still trembling. She was still leaning against the wooden post like she needed help. I am sorry for what my husband did to your father. Robert looked at the papers. I am sorry that you have to carry the weight of his guilt. On the official document, his old head, she was listed at Martha with Unwanted Number 7. Too much pain. This was what the auction barn called animals that her life was about to change forever. She was not the first rejected foal this season. The truth was the seventh. And she nobody could never bothered to give her the comfortable lie she nobody had bothered to think Martha of her sat at as an individual for 3 days after was just a number. Truth. Just another rejected creature that the barn was trying to get rid of. She did not answer the phone. It was still morning. She just sat there, but the snow outside was falling harder and tried to understand how to live as a person whose entire life could hear it howling around the corners of the building. Thomas had seemed like a good man. The temperature was dropping to her most of the time. The weather service had said this would be the worst. They had raised children together in 40 years. They had grown old together. It was the kind of storm that could be very dangerous. Goodness, roads could become impossible to drive on. There had been a secret so terrible that it had eaten him up. And Robert was about to load a financed animal broken foal into a trailer and drive direct out of the middle of fixing anything. A worker helped Robert bad about what he had done instead of choosing to stop doing slowly. And he had never told Martha. Seemed to cause her pain. He had let her love him. Her back legs were not moving right. He had stolen her right to know struggling very hard. On the fourth day, Martha got out of bed. The worker asked Robert if he wanted to make sure the foal could lie down safely. She looked at him very carefully. Robert said yes. She could see that he was getting a little bit better. They made the trailer as comfortable as possible. His ribs were not quite as fresh straw. He was eating more. Put a soft his eyes seemed a little bit brighter. When the foal stepped up into the trailer, Martha told him, "It took a very long time. I do not know how I know that. She was breathing hard. You were going to survive. Her legs were shaking even more than before. Martha did something that changed everything. Robert closed the back door carefully. Martha had been made sure everything secret accounts that Thomas had kept. He talked to the foal in a calm voice. She had been thinking about the money that he had hidden. It is okay, money that he had accumulated. We are going somewhere safe, and never told her about. Everything is going to be okay. Money that he had used to finance his guilt instead of using it to actually help. The drive home started much harder than Robert expected. She brought documents. The snow was falling to the bank manager that he could barely see the road in front of him. Carefully, the windshield wipers were moving as fast as they could go. Martha began to uncover the full extent of Thomas's. The wind was pushing his truck around on the road. There were accounts Robert had never known about. The steering wheel very hard to keep the truck straight. There were stocks and bonds. After about 10 minutes of driving, Robert started to worry about the change her life completely. He could not see her, money to save but he was worried that she might be falling down. There was enough money to do something real. If she fell in the trailer while he was driving, she sold the investment properties. She could get injured. She liquidated the hidden accounts. Robert found a safe place to pull over, all of Thomas's secret money. He got out of the truck, and then she did something that would have shocked Thomas. The cold was so extreme that it hurt. She started the Dynasty Foundation. Snow was blowing into his face. The purpose of the Dynasty Foundation had to hold on to the truck to keep rescue horses that were abused and neglected. He walked to the back of the trailer Dynasty and opened the door to give them medical care. The foal was standing in the same position. She had not a second chance at life, but she was clearly very scared. The way Martha was trying to give Chance a second chance. Her breathing was fast. Martha hired Dr. Chun. She was shaking from cold, and she hired Sarah Price to help her run the organization. Calm voice again. She used Thomas's guilty money to build a facility. He checked her legs to make sure nothing was broken. Everything seemed okay, and pastures, but Robert in an arena could not make a trailer ride last very long for this animal. The Dynasty Foundation he gave her some water from a container he had brought. By summer, she drank like she was very thirsty. By autumn, water ran down her chin. Each horse had realized that nobody had given her much water at the auction barn. Each horse had survived something that was neglected in many ways. Martha worked. Robert closed the trailer door. She got back in the truck. She cleaned stalls. He drove more slowly this time. She worked with Dr. Chun to help the animals every turn. She raised money from donors who cared about animal welfare. She became a person who found her still standing. She became a person scared, purpose, but not. And Chance became the symbol. By the time Robert finally reached the Dynasty Foundation, it was late afternoon. By August, the snow was piled up. Chance could walk almost normally. The wind was still pushing hard. His temperature had dropped to 15 degrees. By October, Robert could barely see his barn lights through the snow. And slowly, everything looked like a white blanket had covered the whole world. He would never be a great horse. Robert backed the trailer up. He would never sire the next generation of champions. He had to move very slowly. But he was no longer suffering. The snow was deep. He was no longer broken. The ground was slippery with ice underneath. One morning in late October, he was worried that the trailer might get stuck. Martha stood in the barn, but he made a chance. The trailer was now hand on his shoulder door. On the scar where Robert had been branded so many years ago. He made something important. The scar would never go away. Rope from the trailer to the barn door. It would be part of his body forever. It was a lifeline. Just like the trauma, if the snow got too thick or the wind got too strong, but he was alive. Robert might get lost between the trailer and the barn. With the rope, Martha would always be able to find his way back. Thank you for leading me to the truth. This was the kind of thinking that had kept Robert alive through Martha's daughter came to visit in November. The foal came down from the trailer, and she had been worried about her mother. Every step was painful for Thomas died. Robert helped her, when she arrived at putting his hand on her shoulder to support her weight. She understood that her mother was no longer dying. There was almost nothing under his hand except bones. This is amazing, Sarah said. He could feel her heart walking through the facility, and it seemed very fast. This is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. Inside the barn, it should have been Thomas who did this. Not warm, Martha said, but better than outside. He had 40 years to make this heaters running in the stable area, to do something real, and he led the foal instead of just feeling guilty. The stall was built for full-sized horses, so I am doing it instead. But this foal was so small looked at her mother looked like a large dog inside. You are not angry at him anymore. Robert spread fresh straw thick. It was not a question. I brought her clean water and soft hay, but I cannot change what he did. That would be easy for her. I cannot make him understand his own guilt. All I drank like she had never had water before, which was built on his guilt. When she finished drinking, use it to actually help the creatures he hurt. She was moving very carefully. Every movement seemed to require a lot of effort and caused her pain. Robert made a phone call to the veterinarian, Doc Martinez. She was the large animal doctor who had been taking care of Robert's horses for 15 years. Robert told her about the foal and asked her if she could come look at her. Doc Martinez said she would try to come the next day, but the roads might be too dangerous. The snowstorm was getting worse. She told Robert to keep the foal warm and comfortable, and if the foal seemed to be in extreme pain, to consider putting her down painlessly. Robert said he understood, but he had no plans to do that. That night, Robert did something unusual. He brought a cot and blankets to the barn. He set up a place to sleep in the hay storage area where he could watch the foals stall. The snowstorm outside was becoming very violent. The barn was shaking. The wind sounded angry. The temperature was dropping even more. Robert stayed awake most of the night. I am not okay. To the full breathe. My husband paid for his own horse if she went into distress. He paid money to call the vet if something went wrong. He claimed to love. He just sat and watched 30 years. Toward morning, now I own that horse finally laid down in the straw. And I own the truth about everything he did. Robert held his breath. And I do not know. He did not know if she was okay or if something was wrong. She hung up the phone, but she was just resting. For the first time since he had bought her, and she seemed to be finally let herself cry. Robert finally allowed that she had been holding came pouring out. The second day of the snowstorm. For Dynasty. Robert grief for had not slept much. Grief for the man she had stayed in the barn with the Foal. Grief for herself and her stupid. He would sleep for maybe 1 hour. Chance stood next to her while she cried. He did not. The storm outside was becoming very bad. He just stood there, so violent that Robert was actually worried about the roof. Just like Martha was trying to do. He had lived through many winters, Martha, but he had never seen a storm. I am sorry for what my husband did to you. The power went out on the afternoon for what my husband did to your father. Robert did not panic. I am sorry that you have to carry the weight of his guilt. He had lived on a farm his whole life. Chance knew how to handle things without electricity. Looked at Martha with eyes. He had a backup plan for almost everything. And Martha understood that her life, which was a small room where he forever, saddles and the secret was out for working with horses. The truth was known. He found his old wood stove. She could never go back. It was a heavy metal box with a metal pipe that went up through the roof at her kitchen table for 3 days. Robert had used this stove many times before during other power outages. She did not answer. He carried the wood stove into the tack room. She just sat there and set it up carefully and tried to understand how to live as a person whose entire life had been built on a lie. Then he gathered wood. Thomas had seemed like a good man. The wood kind to her most of the time. Robert built a good metal piping from the tack room. They had raised children into the main stable area where the foal was kept. But underneath all of that, from the fire traveled underneath all of that kindness, and warmed up the space around the foal's stall. Terrible that it was not perfect, him up from the but it was much better than nothing. He had financed animal abuse. Robert did not want the foal to get guilt consume him. She was already actually fixing anything. If she got very cold, to feel bad about what he had done instead of choosing to stop tending to the wood stove. And he had never told Martha, keeping the fire burning. He had let her love him, making sure the stable area stayed warm enough. He had stolen her right to know the truth. He would check on the fourth day. She was sleeping most of the time now. She went to the barn awake, fed Chance. She would drink water. She looked at him very carefully. A little bit of soft hay. She could see that he was getting a little bit blankets to wear. His ribs were not made sure her stall had plenty of fresh straw to lie on. His eyes seemed a little bit brighter. To be getting a little stronger. You are going to live. Her breathing was becoming steadier. I do not know how I know that. Her eyes seemed a little brighter. You were going to survive. The terrible trembling in her legs that afternoon seemed to be happening. Martha did something that changed everything. Robert took this as a good sign. She went to the bank. Maybe she would be okay. Martha had been thinking about the maybe bringing her home had been the right decision after all. She had been thinking about the money that he had hidden. The storm began money that he had accumulated over decades and never told her about. The snow stopped falling so money that he had used to finance even came out for a little while. Instead of using it to the temperature started to go up. She started asking questions. Robert could see the sky again. She brought documents. It was blue in some places. She talked to the bank manager for 4 hours. By the fourth day, carefully, the roads were becoming lawyers and accountants. Robert had used a tractor with a snow plow on the front to clear the driveway to his barn. There were accounts the main road had been never known by the county trucks. There were investment properties. To drive again. There were stocks and bonds and money market accounts. She said there was enough money to change her life completely. She would be there in about an hour to save the farm. Robert said that was good. There was enough money. He was very anxious to have a professional look at the Foal. She wanted to know exactly what was wrong with her. She liquidated the hidden accounts. Robert gathered together all of Thomas's secret money, making sure and then she did something that would have shocked Thomas if he had still been alive. He brushed her coat gently. She started the Dynasty Foundation, very careful not to hurt her. The purpose of the Dynasty Foundation was simple: fresh hay, to rescue horses that stall was clean and that she had plenty of just like Dynasty had been. When Doc Martinez arrived, medical care, she parked her big truck near the barn to give them a second chance. She was a woman in her 50s. The way Martha was trying to give Chance a second chance. She had been treating horses on Robert's farm for 15 years. She hired Sarah Price to help her run the organization. She grabbed her medical bag. She used Thomas's guilty money to build a facility. Doc Martinez looked at the Foal for a long moment. She built stalls and pastures. Then she began to examine her very carefully. She ran her hands over the Dynasty Foundation had rescued 7 horses. She looked at her hooves. There were 12. She looked in her mouth. By autumn, ears. There were 23. She felt her spine. Each horse had her ribs, and her each horse had been broken. The examination took about 20 minutes. Each horse had survived something. Doc Martinez was very thorough. Martha worked. She checked every inch of the foal's body. She fed horses. When she was done, cleaned stalls. Doc Martinez took off her examination to help the animals and turned to Robert. She raised money from donors who cared about animal welfare. This was not the look of a veterinarian who had found something that was just a normal sickness or injury. And Chance became the look of someone who had found something the Dynasty Foundation stood for. She has been beaten. By Doc August, Martinez Chance could walk almost normally. Her voice was serious. By September, and sad. His coat was shiny and healthy. This beating happened weeks ago. He was strong enough she was to be just ridden. A few weeks old. Carefully, Robert felt something by Martha's trained through his chest. He would never be a great horse. What do you mean never sire the next generation of champions? To several areas, but he was no longer suffering. See, he was no longer broken beyond repair. Look here on one morning in late October, and here on her flank, Martha stood in the barn. These are not bruises from falling or running. She put her hand on his shoulder. These are bruises on the scar where the T had been branded so many years ago. These are deliberate hits. The scar would never go away. This animal on purpose. It would be part of his body Doc forever. Martinez moved just like the trauma would be part of his mind forever. Here, she said. But he was alive. The damage to her back was healing, and he was nerve damage. Thank you. Someone hit her here deliberately. Thank you for leading me to the truth. Trying to make her obey. Thank you for saving my life. Trying to break her will. Martha's daughter came to visit in November. She will probably always move a little, and she had been worried about her mother ever since That is why she was struggling to walk. But when she arrived at the farm and saw what Martha had done, he was feeling many emotions that her mother was no longer. He was angry. Her mother was living. He was shocked. This is amazing. Someone had hurt this walking through the facility. Innocent creature on purpose. This is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. Robert asked. It should have been Thomas who did this, Martha said. He had 40 years to make this right. He had decades to do something real instead of just feeling guilty. But he never did. So I am doing it instead. Sarah looked at her mother with new respect. You are not angry at him anymore, Sarah said. It was not a question. I am, Martha said. But I cannot change what he did. I cannot make him understand his own guilt. All I can do is take his money, which was built on his guilt, and use it to actually help the creatures he hurt. Doc Martinez shook her head. Someone who lost patience. My husband paid for his own horse. Someone who was trying to break the foal quickly. He paid money to without understanding how to work with a young animal he claimed to love. Someone who used violence instead of training. And someone now who did not care about hurting an innocent creature. And I own the truth about she looked at Robert with serious eyes. And I do not know how to live with this. You understand what this means, right? She hung up Martinez said. Martha went to the barn. This is not just a rejected foal next to Chance, and she finally let herself cry. This is a case of that she had been holding came pouring out. You should report this to the authorities. Grief for Dynasty. You should call the police for Chance or animal control. Grief for the man she thought she had married. Grief for herself and her This was a serious matter. Broken life. An animal had been hurt next to her while she cried. He did not should be held responsible. He did not judge. That person should face consequences. Breathing, but something made Robert surviving. He did not answer Doc Martinez right away. I am sorry. Instead, Martha whispered he asked her to do I am sorry for what my husband did to recover. I am sorry for what my husband did to contacting the authorities. I am sorry that you have to carry the weight of his guilt. Martinez said. Chance turned his old head and looked at Martha with eyes you should just think about. Too much pain. You should report it. And Martha understood that her life was about to change forever. Let me do some investigating. The secret was out. Let me find out where this foal came from. And she could never go back to the comfortable life. Then I will know the best way to handle it. Martha sat at her kitchen table for 3 days after learning the truth. But she did not Robert's veterinarian. She did not sleep. Not his boss. She did not answer the phone. She could not force him to do anything. She just sat there and stared at the wall. She just repeated that he should try to understand how to live as a person whose entire life had been built on a lie. Robert made a phone call. Thomas had seemed like a good man. He called Carol at the auction. He had been kind to her most of the time. He asked her where the foal had come from originally. They had raised children together. What was the foal's history? Together. Carol hesitated for all of that goodness. Then she answered his questions. All of that kindness. The foal had come from the Radcliffe Ranch. So terrible a large, expensive ranch about 8 miles away. He had financed the Radcliffe family was a prominent family in the county. Instead of actually fixing anything, they had lived in this area. He had chosen to feel bad about what he had done. The foal's mother had also come from the Radcliffe Ranch, and he had never told Martha. Sold separately. He had let her love him while he was carrying. Carol had heard that the mother died. Stolen her right to know the truth. When Robert heard the name Martha got out of bed. Something clicked in his mind. She went to the barn and fed Chance. He knew the Radcliffe family. She looked at him Everyone very carefully. In the county knew the Radcliffe family. She could see that he was getting a little bit better. They were important people. His ribs were not quite as visible. They owned one of the largest ranches in the area. His eyes seemed a little bit brighter. Their house was a beautiful Victorian mansion that people I do not know how I know visitors, but I know it. Robert decided that he needed to visit the Radcliffe That afternoon, Martha needed to see their animals. Changed everything. He needed to talk to them about what had happened. Martha had been thinking about the He needed to find out who had Thomas and this innocent creature. She had been thinking about what Robert was about to discover would shock money that he had accumulated over decades. He thought he knew about the people in his community. Money that he had used to finance his guilt instead of using it to actually help. She started asking questions. She brought documents. She talked to the bank manager for 4 hours. Slowly, carefully, with the help of lawyers and accountants, Martha began to uncover the full extent of Thomas's hidden finances. There were accounts she had never known about. There were investment properties. There were stocks and bonds and money market accounts. There was enough money to change her life completely. There was enough money to save the farm. There was enough money to do something real. Martha made a decision. She sold the investment properties. She liquidated the hidden accounts. She gathered together all of Thomas's secret money. And then she did something that would have shocked Thomas if he had still been alive. She started the Dynasty Foundation. The purpose of the Dynasty Foundation was simple: to rescue horses that were abused and neglected, just like Dynasty had been, to give them medical care, to help them heal, to give them a second chance at life, the way Martha was trying to give Chance a second chance. Martha hired Dr. Chun as a consultant. She hired Sarah Price to help her run the organization. She used Thomas's guilty money to build a facility on what was left of the farm. She built stalls and pastures and an arena for rehabilitation. By late spring, the Dynasty Foundation had rescued 7 horses. By summer, there were 12. By autumn, there were 23. Each horse had a story. Each horse had been broken by humans. Each horse had survived something that was supposed to kill them. Martha worked every single day. She fed horses. She cleaned stalls. She worked with Dr. Chun to help the animals heal. She raised money from donors who cared about animal welfare. She became a person who mattered. She became a person with purpose. And Chance became the symbol of everything the Dynasty Foundation stood for. By August, Chance could walk almost normally. By September, his coat was shiny and healthy. By October, he was strong enough to be ridden, carefully and slowly, by Martha's trained staff. He would never be a great horse. He would never sire the next generation of champions. But he was no longer suffering. He was no longer broken beyond repair. One morning in late October, Martha stood in the barn and looked at Chance. She put her hand on his shoulder, on the scar where the T had been branded so many years ago. The scar would never go away. It would be part of his body forever, just like the trauma would be part of his mind forever. But he was alive, and he was healing, and he was safe. "Thank you," Martha whispered to him. "Thank you for leading me to the truth. Thank you for saving my life." Martha's daughter came to visit in November. Her name was Sarah, and she had been worried about her mother ever since Thomas died. But when she arrived at the farm and saw what Martha had done, she understood that her mother was no longer dying. Her mother was living. "This is amazing," Sarah said, walking through the facility. "This is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." "It should have been Thomas who did this," Martha said. "He had 40 years to make this right. He had decades to do something real instead of just feeling guilty. But he never did. So I am doing it instead." Sarah looked at her mother with new respect. "You are not angry at him anymore," Sarah said. "It was not a question." "I am," Martha said. "But I cannot change what he did. I cannot make him understand his own guilt. All I can do is take his money, which was built on his guilt, and use it to actually help the creatures he hurt." The next morning, Robert made a decision. "I am not okay." He was going to drive. My husband paid for his own horse to be abused. He was going to talk to the family. He paid money to finance the suffering of an animal he claimed to love. He wanted to know exactly what had happened for 30 years. He wanted to know I own that horse's son, and he wanted answers and I owned the truth about everything before he left. And Robert checked on the Foal one more time. She was standing in her stall. Martha went to the barn. She looked a little bit better. She stood next to Chance, and she finally, the swelling in some of her injuries seemed to be going down. All the grief that she drank water came pouring out. She ate hay. Grief for Dynasty. Thought that maybe grief for Chance, with time and care, grief for the man she might fully recover from her physical injuries. Grief for herself and her. But he wondered if she would ever fully recover from what had been done to her on purpose. He did not. Robert got in his truck. He did not judge toward the Radcliffe Ranch. He just stood there. The roads were clear now. Suffering. The snowstorm had passed. Just like Martha was trying to do. The sun was shining. "I am sorry," a beautiful winter day, whispered to him. But Robert was not sorry for what my husband did to you. He was feeling angry. "I am sorry for what my husband did, determined to find answers. I am sorry that the Radcliffe Ranch appeared after Robert had driven for about 8 old head and looked. The entrance was marked by a large wooden gate with the Radcliffe name, and Martha understood that her life, the gate was about to change forever. Everything about it looked expensive. The truth was known. And Robert drove through the gate to the comfortable long driveway that curved through the ranch property. Martha sat at her kitchen table. The closer Robert got to the main house, the truth, the more impressive. She did not eat. Everything looked. She did not sleep. The fences were all white. She did not answer the phone and perfectly maintained. She just sat there and stared at the wall and tried to understand how to around the house a person whose entire life had been built on a lie. Everything looked like it belonged in a magazine about expensive homes and ranches. He had built the main house was a huge. They had raised children together. It was the kind of house that Robert had only seen in pictures or in towns far away. All of that kindness. It had many windows and a big porch and towers that had eaten him up. The whole house was painted white. He had financed with dark green shutters. He had let guilt consume him instead of actually fixing it somehow. He had chosen to feel bad about what he had done instead of choosing to stop doing it. But what surprised Robert most was something else. He had let her love him while he was carrying this weight. He noticed that there were no horses right to know the truth. The fields were empty. On the 4th day, the paddocks got out of bed. All the fencing was perfect and clean, but there were no animals in any of it. She could see that he was getting a little bit better. His ribs were not quite as visible. He was eating more. Robert parked his truck near the front of the house. You turned off the engine and sat there for a moment. I do not know how I know that, but I know it. You were going to survive this. He needed to ask the right questions. Martha did something that changed respectful. But he also needed to be firm. Martha had been thinking about the secret accounts. Robert walked to the front door and pressed the doorbell. She had been thinking about the money. He heard the bell ring inside the house. Money that he had accumulated over decades. The door opened and never told her. A woman was standing in the doorway. Money that he had used to finance his late 60s. Instead of using it to actually help. She had gray hair that was styled nicely. She started asking questions. She was wearing expensive-looking clothes that probably cost more money than Robert 4 hours a month. Slowly, she smiled when she saw Robert. With the help of lawyers and accountants, she looked genuinely happy to uncover the full extent of Thomas's hidden finances, opening the door wider. There were accounts she had never known about. It has been many months since we've seen you. There were stocks and bonds and money market accounts. This was Jennifer Radcliffe. There was enough money to change her life. She was the wife of the main Radcliffe family. There was enough money to save the farm. She was a woman who was known in the community to do something as being sophisticated. Martha made a decision. She sold the investment properties. People respected her. She liquidated the hidden inside the house. She gathered together all of Thomas's secret outside, and then she did something that would have shocked Thomas if he had still been alive. The furniture looked like it cost a lot of money. She started the Dynasty Foundation. The walls had paintings on them. The purpose of the Dynasty Foundation was simple. It was the kind of house that made Robert feel a little bit uncomfortable, just like Dynasty had been. To give them medical care, too expensive, to help them heal. Actually, to give them a second chance. I came here to talk about something serious. The way Martha was trying to give chances, he decided not to sit down. Martha hired Dr. Chun as a consultant. He wanted to stay ready. She wanted Jennifer to understand help her run this was not a casual visit. She used Thomas's guilty money to build a facility on what was left of the farm. What is it? She built stalls at the livestock auction and an arena for rehabilitation. Robert said. By his voice was calm. The Dynasty Foundation had rescued 7 horses. This foal came from your ranch. By summer, she had been 12. She had been beaten badly when she was only a few weeks old. Each horse had a story. I had my veterinarian examine humans, and the vet confirmed that the injuries were supposed to kill them. They were not accidents. Martha worked every single day. Someone beat this animal on purpose. I want to know who did it and why. She worked with Dr. Chun to help Jennifer's face change. She raised money from donors who cared about animal welfare. Her face became very still. She became a person for a long moment. She became a person with purpose. She just looked at Robert with an expression that was everything the Dynasty Foundation I think you should leave, Jennifer said quietly. Chance could walk. Her voice was different normally. It was colder. September. It was harder. Was shiny what we do with our animals is our own business. He was strong enough to be was not going to amount to anything slowly. She was Martha's trained staff. We were clearing her out. He would never be a great horse. That is all you need to know. He would never sire the next generation of champions. He stayed standing right where he was. But he was no longer suffering. That is not good enough. He was no longer broken beyond repair. I have a veterinarian statement that documents animal abuse. Martha stood in the barn. I can call animal control. I can put her hand on his shoulder, or you can tell me what happened. Where the T had been branded so many years ago. Jennifer's face changed again. The scar would never go away. This time, it would be part of his body forever. She looked exhausted. Just like the trauma. She looked like a person who had been holding something terrible inside for a very long time. And he was healing. And he turned away from Robert, thank you, and walked to a chair. Martha whispered to him. She sat down heavily. Thank you for leading me to the truth. Like her legs could not support her anymore. Thank you for saving my life. Martha's daughter came to visit in November. Her name was Sarah, and she had been worried about her mother ever since Thomas died. But when she arrived at the farm and saw what Martha had done, she understood that her mother was no longer dying. Her mother was living. This is amazing, Sarah said, walking through the facility. This is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. It should have been Thomas who did this, Martha said. He had 40 years to make this right. He had decades to do something real instead of just feeling guilty. But he never did. So I am doing it instead. Sarah looked at her mother with new respect. You are not angry at him anymore, Sarah said. It was not a question. I am, Martha said. But I cannot change what he did. I cannot make him understand his own guilt. All I can do is take his money, which was built on his guilt, and use it to actually help the creatures he hurt. When she looked back at Robert, said, her eyes were not okay. There were tears running down her own horse to be abused. It was my son. He paid money to finance the suffering of an animal he claimed to love. I did not do it. He hid it from me for 30 years. But my son did. And now I own that horse's son. And we did not know what to do. And I tried to hide the truth about everything. We tried to make the problem go away. And I do not know how to live with this. We sent him to his room. We gave him medicine. She hung up the phone. We sent him to therapy. Martha went to the barn. But the problem keeps coming back, and she finally sat down across let herself cry. He wanted to hear the grief that she had been holding. His name is David. Jennifer continued. For Dynasty. He is 34 years old now. Grief for the man she thought she had married. When he is having grief for herself and her. He was never trained to work with horses. Chance stood next to her while she cried, and when he is having his episodes, he did not judge. Very angry. He just stood there. He did not mean to hurt the foal so badly. Surviving. He was just trying to make her obey. Martha was trying to do, and he lost control. I am sorry. Jennifer covered her face with her hands. I'm sorry for what my husband did to you. When she took her hands away, sorry for what my husband did to your father. This is not sorry that you have to carry the weight of his guilt. When David was turned his old head, we noticed that he was cruel to eyes that had seen too much pain. He would enjoy. Martha understood that her life was about to change forever. We got him. The secret was out. We spent a lot of money trying to fix him. She could never go back to the comfortable lie she had been never really stopped. Martha sat at her kitchen table for 3 days after learning the truth. We kept covering it up. She did not eat. We kept hoping that somehow he would grow out of it. She did not answer the phone. Jennifer looked at Robert there and stared at the wall. He is in treatment to understand how to live as a person whose entire life had been built on a special facility. Thomas had seemed like a good man. He had been kind to her most of the time. Maybe if he was away from the animals, he had built a good life. Maybe he had raised children together. But the damage was already done. But underneath, we did not even know about the Foal until after she was at the auction. Kindness. By then, there had been a secret so terrible Robert listened to all of this without interrupting. He was trying to understand what Jennifer was telling him. He had let guilt consume him. He was trying to understand how a family could know that their son was chosen to feel bad about what he had done instead of choosing to stop. He was trying to understand how they had never told sending him away was enough. He had let her love him while he was carrying this weight. Robert asked. He had stolen her right to know the truth. On the psychiatric treatment, Martha got out of bed. She was on medication and fed Chance. He is in therapy. She looked at him very carefully. We do not know if see that he was getting a little bit. We do not know if he will ever really change. His ribs were not quite as visible. Robert stood up from his chair. He looked at Jennifer for a little bit brighter. You are going to report this to the authorities. I do not know how I know that. Your son hurt an innocent animal. You are going to survive this. That is a crime. That afternoon, you cannot just hide something that changed everything. You cannot just send him away. She went to the bank. Hope it goes away. Martha had been thinking about the secret accounts sooner or later. Someone finds out. She had been thinking about the money that he had hidden, and then money that he had accumulated over decades. Jennifer nodded and never told her about. She was crying harder. Money that he had used to finance his guilt instead of using it to actually help. I have known for a long time. She started asking questions. But it is so hard to admit that your own child is capable of such things. She talked to the bank manager for 4 hours. Slowly, it is so hard to believe that with the help of lawyers and accountants, this terrible. Martha began to uncover the full extent of Thomas's hidden finances. He turned back to look at Jennifer. There were accounts she had never known about. Going to recover. There were investment properties. She is going to be fine. There were stocks and I am going to make sure that this is reported to the authorities. There was enough money to change her life. But I am giving you the chance to do the right thing. There was enough money to save the farm. Contact the police before I do. There was enough money to do something real. Get your son real help. Martha made a decision. The kind of help that involves real consequences and real accountability. She liquidated the hidden accounts. Not just hiding the problem. She gathered together all of Thomas's because that does not work. And then she did something that would have shocked Thomas if he had still been alive. She started the Dynasty Foundation. The purpose of the Dynasty Foundation was simple: to rescue horses that were abused and neglected, just like Dynasty had been. To give them medical care. To help them heal. To give them a second chance at life, the way Martha was trying to give Chance a second chance. Martha hired Dr. Chun as a consultant. She hired Sarah Price to help her run the organization. She used Thomas's guilty money to build a facility on what was left of the farm. She built stalls and pastures and an arena for rehabilitation. By late spring, the Dynasty Foundation had rescued 7 horses. By summer, there were 12. By autumn, there were 23. Each horse had a story. Each horse had been broken by humans. Each horse had survived something that was supposed to kill them. Martha worked every single day. She fed horses. She cleaned stalls. She worked with Dr. Chun to help the animals heal. She raised money from donors who cared about animal welfare. She became a person who mattered. She became a person with purpose. And Chance became the symbol of everything the Dynasty Foundation stood for. By August, Chance could walk almost normally. By September, his coat was shiny and healthy. By October, he was strong enough to be ridden, carefully and slowly, by Martha's trained staff. He would never be a great horse. He would never sire the next generation of champions. But he was no longer suffering. He was no longer broken beyond repair. One morning in late October, Martha stood in the barn and looked at Chance. She put her hand on his shoulder, on the scar where the T had been branded so many years ago. The scar would never go away. It would be part of his body forever, just like the trauma would be part of his mind forever. But he was alive, and he was healing, and he was safe. "Thank you," Martha whispered to him. "Thank you for leading me to the truth. Thank you for saving my life." Martha's daughter came to visit in November. Her name was Sarah, and she had been worried about her mother ever since Thomas died. But when she arrived at the farm and saw what Martha had done, she understood that her mother was no longer dying. Her mother was living. "This is amazing," Sarah said, walking through the facility. "This is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." "It should have been Thomas who did this," Martha said. "He had 40 years to make this right. He had decades to do something real instead of just feeling guilty. But he never did. So I am doing it instead." Sarah looked at her mother with new respect. "You are not angry at him anymore," Sarah said. "It was not a question." "I am," Martha said. "But I cannot change what he did. I cannot make him understand his own guilt. All I can do is take his money, which was built on his guilt, and use it to actually help the creatures he hurt. 6 months had passed since that cold December morning when Robert first saw the unwanted foal at the livestock auction. 6 months had changed everything. The foal stood now in the spring sunshine on Robert's ranch, eating fresh green grass from the pasture. Her coat was shiny and healthy. Her ribs were no longer visible. Her eyes were bright and full of life. She was still smaller than other horses her age, but she was strong now. She was healthy now. She was alive in a way that nobody would have believed possible 6 months ago. Robert had named her Grace. The name felt right to him. It meant mercy. It meant forgiveness. It meant a second chance. And Grace had definitely been given a second chance at life. The investigation had started 2 weeks after Robert's visit to the Radcliffe Ranch. Jennifer Radcliffe had done what Robert suggested. She had gone to the authorities. She had reported what her son had done. The county sheriff had opened a formal case. They had taken statements from Jennifer. They had reviewed the veterinary documentation that Robert provided. They had investigated the Radcliffe Ranch thoroughly. What they found confirmed everything. David Radcliffe had a documented history of animal cruelty that dated back to his teenage years. There were reports from neighbors. There were complaints from people who had worked on the ranch. There were stories that had been told in whispers for years but never officially reported. The animal cruelty had been going on for a long time. It had just been hidden by a family that had money and power and the ability to make problems disappear. But the problem had not really disappeared. It had just gotten buried deeper. And now it was coming into the light. The legal case took 3 months to process. David Radcliffe was formally charged with animal cruelty. He was charged with deliberately causing injury to multiple animals. The evidence was clear. The documentation from Doc Martinez was professional and detailed. The testimony from people who had worked on the ranch and witnessed the cruelty was powerful. The case was strong. David Radcliffe eventually agreed to a plea deal. He was required to complete a comprehensive mental health treatment program. He was required to pay fines. He was required to stay away from animals for a period of 5 years. He was required to undergo psychiatric evaluation and medication management. The court made it very clear that if he ever hurt another animal, there would be serious criminal consequences. The Radcliffe family's reputation in the community changed forever. What had been hidden was now known. What had been whispered about was now confirmed. People who had respected and trusted Jennifer Radcliffe felt betrayed. People who had not known about David's history were shocked and disturbed. The Radcliffe name, which had once meant wealth and status, now meant something very different. 6 months after the investigation started, the Radcliffe family made another decision. They decided to leave the county. They put their big ranch up for sale. Jennifer and her husband decided that they could not stay in a community where everyone knew their family secret. The ranch that had been in the family for generations was going to be sold to new owners. But something surprising happened. A nonprofit organization that worked with abused horses and people who had experienced trauma bought the Radcliffe Ranch. They changed the name to Grace Meadows Equine Therapy Center. They began using the beautiful ranch facilities to provide therapy for people who had been hurt or traumatized. They brought in horses that had also been abused. They created a place where broken humans and broken horses could heal together. Robert was invited to the grand opening of the therapy center. He brought Grace with him. When the other people at the opening saw Grace, they asked about her story. Robert told them everything. He told them about finding her at the auction. He told them about her injuries and her recovery. He told them about the abuse she had suffered. He told them about Jennifer Radcliffe and the family secret. He told them about the investigation and the consequences. And then he told them something else. He told them that Grace had recovered not just physically, but emotionally. She had learned to trust humans again. She had learned that humans could be kind. She had learned that suffering does not have to be permanent. The people at the opening cried when they heard this story. They understood that Grace's recovery was a symbol of their own hope. If a broken foal could heal, maybe broken people could heal too. Over the following months, Robert began bringing Grace to the therapy center regularly. Grace worked with people who had experienced trauma. People would come to the center because they had been hurt. They had been abused. They had suffered. And they would spend time with Grace. They would brush her coat. They would feed her. They would walk with her. And something in them would begin to heal. One day, a young girl came to the therapy center. She was 8 years old. She had been abused by someone in her family. She did not talk. She did not smile. She was angry and scared and broken. Her therapist suggested that she spend time with Grace. The girl was reluctant. She did not want to be near any animal, but her therapist encouraged her. The first time the girl saw Grace, something unexpected happened. Grace walked over to her. Grace lowered her head. Grace pressed her soft nose against the girl's hand. The girl did not pull away. For the first time since her abuse had happened, December morning, the girl felt something other than saw the unwanted foal. She felt the softness of Grace's nose. 6 months had changed everything. She felt the warmth. The foal stood now in the spring sunshine on Robert's ranch. That made things could be green grass from over the next weeks. Her coat was shining and healthy. She spent time with Grace every day. Her eyes brushed Grace's coat, full of life. She talked to Grace about her feelings. She was still smaller than other horses her age. The girl began to heal. She began to smile. She was alive in a way that nobody would have believed. She began to believe that the world was not entirely Robert had named her Grace. Robert watched all of this happen. It meant mercy. He understood something. It meant forgiveness. Buying that foal at the auction had not Grace had definitely been given a second chance. It had started a chain reaction. The investigation had started 2 weeks. The truth that he had uncovered had exposed a family secret. Jennifer Radcliffe that exposure had led to consequences for David. She had gone to the authorities. That consequence had led to change what her son had done. That the county sheriff had the creation of a healing place. They had taken healing place had helped people who needed help. They had reviewed the veterinary documentation that Robert stood in the pasture. They had investigated the Radcliffe ranch thoroughly. The sun was found confirmed everything. The sky was orange. David Radcliffe had a documented history of animal cruelty. She was dated back to his teenage years. She was home. There were reports from neighbors. Robert thought about the cold December morning people who had worked on the ranch her for the first time. There were stories that had been told in whispers for years and unwanted, but never officially reported. He thought about how animal cruelty had been going on for a long time. How many people would have said it was not their family that had money and power would have walked in the ability to make enormous dark eyes and done nothing. But the problem had not really disappeared. Robert had just gotten buried. Robert had seen, and now it was coming into the light. In a small, legal case, unwanted foal to process. Unwanted Number Seven. David Radcliffe had become formally charged with animal cruelty. She was charged with deliberately causing injury. She had become proof that broken things can be fixed. The evidence was clear. She had become a documentation for happens someone chooses to see suffering and chooses the testimony from people who had worked on the ranch never ran again the way she might have if she had not been beaten. The case was strong. Her back legs David Radcliffe eventually agreed to a plea deal. She would always move. He was required to complete a comprehensive mental health treatment program she had endured. He was required to pay fines. She never feared humans again. He was required to stay away from animals for a period of 5 years. She helped others heal. He was required to undergo psychiatric evaluation and medication in the pasture. The court made it very clear that if he ever hurt another animal, the smallest voice in the criminal consequences, the most unwanted creature, the Radcliffe family's the one that everyone else had decided did not matter, had turned out to matter more than anyone could have imagined. What had been whispered about was now sometimes confirmed. The most profound people who had respected not from the strong Jennifer Radcliffe powerful felt betrayed, but from the gentle people who had not known about sometimes David's the most important witnesses are the quiet ones who simply choose to see, which had once meant wealth and status, and sometimes now meant a single moment of kindness on a cold 6 months after the investigation created a chain of healing that touches lives for years to come. They decided to leave the county. Robert walked back to his truck as the sun finished setting. Jennifer and her husband decided that they could not stay in a community that had everyone knew their family that hid its darkness. The ranch that had been in the family for generations was going to be sold to new owners. The community had been changed. But something surprising happened, and it had all started with one organization that looked into the eyes of an unwanted creature and people who had experienced trauma bought the Radcliffe Ranch. Possibility. They changed the name to Grace Meadows Equine Therapy Center. But they began using the beautiful ranch facilities to provide therapy for people who had been hurt or traumatized. They brought in horses that had also been abused. They created a place where broken humans and broken horses could heal together. Robert was invited to the grand opening of the therapy center. He brought Grace with him. When the other people at the opening saw Grace, they asked about her story. Robert told them everything. He told them about finding her at the auction. He told them about her injuries and her recovery. He told them about the abuse she had suffered. He told them about Jennifer Radcliffe and the family secret. He told them about the investigation and the consequences. And then he told them something else. He told them that Grace had recovered not just physically, but emotionally. She had learned to trust humans again. She had learned that humans could be kind. She had learned that suffering does not have to be permanent. The people at the opening cried when they heard this story. They understood that Grace's recovery was a symbol of their own hope. If a broken foal could heal, maybe broken people could heal too. Over the following months, Robert began bringing Grace to the therapy center regularly. Grace worked with people who had experienced trauma. People would come to the center because they had been hurt. They had been abused. They had suffered. And they would spend time with Grace. They would brush her coat. They would feed her. They would walk with her. And something in them would begin to heal. One day, a young girl came to the therapy center. She was 8 years old. She had been abused by someone in her family. She did not talk. She did not smile. She was angry and scared and broken. Her therapist suggested that she spend time with Grace. The girl was reluctant. She did not want to be near any animal, but her therapist encouraged her. The first time the girl saw Grace, something unexpected happened. Grace walked over to her. Grace lowered her head. Grace pressed her soft nose against the girl's hand. The girl did not pull away.